Hello, I'm Billy Hoffman from Rigor. On this edition of Web Perfectionist, we're going to take a look at some best practices around how to inline files into your HTML. So I'm looking again at the Graingers site, and a lot of times we look at high severity or critical issues, but I'm going to show you how looking at a low severity issue actually led me to some interesting optimizations. So I filtered these by low, and I want to take a look at unused inline styles. So unused inline styles basically are where in the HTML we have a style block that defines some rules, but nowhere else inside the HTML are those rules used. And because this is a style block, these rules can only be applied to this HTML. It's not like it's an external CSS file and these are actually reused across multiple pages. So the problem is that this special rule, it's never actually used by this HTML, and so it's just kind of adding bloat to the page. You can kind of think of it as like really aggressive minification because we're removing something that's never actually used. Now, sure enough, it turns out the main Graingers site has 590 unused style rules, which is pretty crazy. And if you click in and look, we actually very helpfully highlight all of the rules that actually are not getting used. But we actually have a throttle in place so that I think we stop highlighting after about 150. So we're not even highlighting all of the problems with this. This was so many unused style rules, I had to see what was happening. So we look at the Graingers site, and I went ahead and just looked at the HTML. So here's the HTML of the Graingers site, and right here at the top, we see a style tag and a whole bunch of helpful HTML or CSS comments. We see a reset style sheet, and this just goes and goes. And it's got nice, helpful links in it and all sorts of stuff, but this is a giant, massive style sheet. In fact, I have to scroll all the way down to about line 4,600 or so to get to the very end of this style block. Turns out there's 78K of CSS rules in here, and 70% of the rules aren't even being used, which is crazy. So what's actually happening here? Well, 78K of content, and the fact that there's some comments in here makes me think what we're actually dealing with is that Grainger is doing CSS inlining. Now, CSS inlining is where you say, hey, on this HTML, if I'm linking to a pretty small style sheet, instead of making the browser go make a request for the style sheet and come back, if there's just a few rules, let's just inline those rules directly into the file. And then there's no need to make a request, and it can go ahead and draw stuff. Now, the problem with this is that what I'm seeing in Grainger is that they dumped an entire style sheet in, and this style sheet, one, hasn't been minified because we have all those great HTML comments at the front. Actually, I think my favorite comment is this one right here, talking about fonts. There must be some way to cache this at Akamai. Yes, there probably is a way to cache it at Akamai, and I guarantee you Rigor can tell you how. So they just took a CSS file and stuck it in here. They didn't minify it, so if you're going to inline a CSS file, you absolutely positively should at least minify it. But if you're going to go ahead and actually insert it into an HTML document, you have to abide by these rules of unused rules. So if you're going to inject it in, go ahead and trim out all the style rules that aren't being used. In this case, we had 78K of CSS rules dumped in, and 78% of it isn't even used. That's a big reason why, over here, if we come over to minification, we can see that their HTML file, it's 1.7 megs. It's a pretty hefty HTML file, but 251K of that could be saved through minification. That's probably a substantial part of that is because they dumped a huge style sheet in, and one, they didn't minify it, but two, they should go ahead and remove all of the unused style rules to reduce the overall size. And with 590 rules, there's a lot of room for improvement. Thanks for watching.